Jeff Nippard's really dropping the ball this time, isn't he?
Sure, he could be enhanced. He could be lying the same way that Liver King was lying. Except, it was obvious Liver King was lying.
Jeff Nippard's decided to make a follow-up video because he was getting clowned on so much for defending fake naturals. And to be honest, I can see why he's done it. For someone who's so reputable in the industry, if he gains this title of defending fake naturals for the wrong reasons, then of course it's going to stain his legacy or ruin his reputation or lower his standing in the information science-based realm in bodybuilding and fitness. Unfortunately though, it isn't a home run like he would have expected. On first initial viewing, I'm sure many people would let it skim over their head. They wouldn't really take in what he's saying and just say, look, he's going off studies. Jeff Nippard's a smart guy. He knows what he's on about, and so I'm going to believe him. But on multiple viewings, or if people bring up points to you, you start to think, Jeff, mate, I don't really know what you're on about. Some were more obvious than others, and to be honest, I'm quite baffled that he actually kept some of them in the video, but I will go through the main ones that I friggin' thought of, because I'm like, bro, like, what?
Some people draw the line here, at Will Tennyson. Others draw the line right up to, but not including, Simeon Panda. Believe it or not, a lot of people still think that The Rock is natty. And recently, millions of people fell for the Liver King scam, buying that his physique came from his ancestral diet and not the $10,000 monthly steroid cocktail. So it's understandable why so many people don't believe influencers anymore. And it's also understandable why there's so much disagreement about how big you can get without steroids.
The first point is linked to literally the beginning of the video, where Jeff Nippard talks about how flawed it is to guess if someone's natural or not based on what you can see, based on their physique. And of course, he makes a good point in this. For instance, if you just look at someone who has great musculature, who's been training for like a relatively long time, and you say, nah, I don't think they're natural. Well, what are you going off? Do you know their blood work? Have you asked about their diet? Have you asked about their training style, how optimal they are, how old they are, stuff like that, right? Those are going to play like huge main factors. And if you just go off what you see, then bro, like, of course it's going to be off. Then of course, once you get more and more information about the person, your natty or not meter of course starts to move, and then, you make more of a solid opinion. So it comes as no surprise when you look at someone like Julian Fitzgerald and say, yes, this guy's clearly or most likely taking something. The guy's been training for close to 4 years. He's 19 years old and he looks like this. Many people have pointed out the fact that he has a bubble gut, literally, which, bro, let's be honest, you're not going to get that just from eating food. And of course, it's so obvious in many cases. Now, many people have brought up the point, including myself, that he actually was an athlete before he genuinely started to do bodybuilding training. Do you know what the one issue is, though? He doesn't have the images to prove it. I've been informed by some people, I'm not entirely sure if this is true, but he says that he's broken his phone and he doesn't have any images from before training. Now, I'm not sure how true that is, but if it's true, then that is absurd. Almost as absurd as what Jeff Nippard does next. Because again, he makes a good point in saying that, look, if you try and judge just based off your eyesight, then it's not going to be entirely correct. But then he goes on to guess the body fat percentage of silver era bodybuilders from the 40s.
In this photo, Steve Reeves is 21 years old at 6 foot 1 inches tall, 215 pounds, and what looks to be around 10, maybe 12% body fat.
Now, I get that Jeff Nippard here isn't guessing their natural status. He's guessing their body fat percentage, which again is going to be extremely inaccurate. Everyone stores fat very differently, so if you look at someone's physique and try and guess their body fat percentage, you may get a decent idea on, their vascularity or if they have abs and stuff like that, maybe muscle definition. But ultimately, from old quality photos 80 years ago, are you seriously going to be as accurate as you think you're going to be to friggin' get these numbers correct, or are you just doing it just to prove a point for the video? Because literally, he uses it to prove that Steve Reeves, which in my opinion is one of the greatest physiques of all time, was natural because his FFMI, which of course is a big statistic that he goes off of in the video, was less than 25, which is deemed the natural limit. However, he then goes on to talk about a bunch of other silver era bodybuilders who have an above 25 FFMI according to Jeff Nippard standards. Again, these guys didn't have their body fat measured, so he's just going off visuals, I'd assume, because I don't know where the hell he's going to get his body fat percentage from. And a lot of these guys do. Someone like John Grimmick, someone like George Eiferman, someone like George Hellinger, I'm going to assume. I honestly don't know how to pronounce his name. But all of these guys, keep this in mind, all of these guys go up to 28. 28 FFMI. And of course, he makes a point in saying that this was the natural limit.
In 1942, Frank Late won the title with an FFMI of, there it is, 25.5. And then from 1943 to 1949, 5 other pre-steroid era bodybuilders broke through the supposed natty ceiling of a 25 FFMI. So yeah, even when you go to the best of the best, hitting a FFMI of over 25 is rare, but it's not impossible.
But my issue with this doesn't end there, because he circles back to this exact same point later on in the video when talking about none other than Liver King. Now, I'm not going to sit here and defend Liver King. Of course, that guy lied. He's lied multiple times about his natural status. Even recently started talking about how it wasn't the steroids or whatever, right? I saw a freaking podcast that he was on, sitting on a podcast with a guy with like 2 followers or something. Like, what the hell is he on about? Now he's with Santa Cruz freaking surfing. Anyway, this is by the by, right? Liver King's just on a mad one recently, even that Netflix documentary. But again, I'm going too much off point. Jeff Nippard talks about in this video how people believed that Liver King was natural, but then he also says that it was obvious that Liver King wasn't natural. Of course it was obvious, right? And you know what he goes off of? How Liver King looked, so he guessed off of his visuals, and he also says that it's obvious because his FFMI was above 25. Now he says that his FFMI was 29. Now this is above those natural silver era bodybuilders that Jeff Nippard was talking about, but again, Jack Hillinger went up to 28. That was 80 years ago when sports nutrition or nutritional science, if that makes sense, wasn't as developed as it is now. The actual equipment that they used was like friggin' far from what we have today, as well as the knowledge, supplementation, and whatnot. So if you think about it, if Jack Hillinger can get 28 back in the 1940s, why couldn't the Liver King be 29 nowadays? Even someone like Charlie Caruso backed this up in his own short, saying that this was way above the natural limit.
Compare people like the Liver King, who once claimed he was natural. His FFMI was 29, way beyond the natural limit.
But again, if someone like George Eiferman can get 27.7 and Jack Hillinger can get 28, which is above the natural limit as is deemed by that study, then why couldn't Liver King be natural? Again, this isn't me defending Liver King. He's friggin' fake natural. The guy was lying. The guy was taking like $10,000 worth of steroids a month or something like this. But bro, like, just judging off of that metric, how is it obvious? This video is so much about common sense. A big part of this video is talking about common sense. Yet that doesn't make sense to me. You're saying that these guys are natural 80 years ago, but nowadays 29, that's too much.
One in how much?
$1 million.
$1 million.
Now, the next thing that stood out to me was all of this Hussein Farhad stuff. Of course, Julian Fitzgerald is the more obvious fake natural when you're actually just looking at their physiques. But again, if we bring more of that information in and we look at someone like Hussein Farhad, then of course, this guy screams fake natural. And Jeff Nippard does make a point of that in this video.
I know the issue with Hussein isn't his size per se. It's the speed of his transformation that's suspicious. In this Instagram post, Hussein said he went from 134 to 184 pounds in his first 3 years of lifting at around the same body fat. I know he looks a lot leaner on the right, but there's some serious angle, lighting, and photo filter tricks going on there, so it's honestly not a good comparison. Regardless, let's just say he gained 50 pounds of lean mass in 3 years. Is that possible naturally?
Now, Jeff Nippard tries multiple ways to try and justify how Hussein Farhad could be natural. For instance, by saying that he was underweight previously, then when he started lifting, he was eating properly, couple that with good genetics, and then of course he can grow a lot more. So his sort of big weight transformation as such was not just muscle, it was the fact that he was underweight and he just sort of came up to a normal level, had great lifting genetics, and put on a lot of muscle also. He uses a study on Italian men, but last I checked, Hussein Farhad's not Italian. He's like a Middle Eastern man who lives in Canada, so that's going to play a big factor. But what Jeff fails to mention is Hussein Farhad's training style during most of the beginning of his training. He trained in his garage with a broom and a friggin' ladder and maybe like a weightlifting bench with no friggin' weights. He just did calisthenics. And this reminds me of like friggin' Obadiah from Iron Man 1. Friggin' Tony Stark made us in a cave with a bunch of scraps. That's literally Hussein Farhad, bro. He friggin' trained in his garage with a broom and a ladder. And he friggin' makes a point of that in this video here. So literally in that short alone, he's saying, oh, I won't forget the broom or whatever he says in the caption. And then he friggin' shows his natural transformation from him doing that to then him being in the gym friggin' ripped, shredded, friggin' fat, full chest, all this stuff like that, right? So again, we need all the information. We shouldn't just blindly go off of what we see, but at the same time, we shouldn't exclude certain information. Like Jeff says, okay, he could have been underweight, but he wasn't training optimally the whole time. At the end of the day, though, it all just baffles me, to be honest. And I'm not going to sit here and go through the studies and whatnot because I'll be honest, I don't think I'm educated enough to do so. I've seen people criticize it, saying how many people have lied in that study and, how they could have been more accurate in a sense. But again, I'm not educated enough in that realm to go into that any further. But I just wanted to say that Jeff talks a lot about common sense in that video. And some of that stuff just really isn't common sense. He contradicts himself quite a few times.